Hello and welcome to Pandooradom. I am your host, Miles Gray. I look forward to today's show and talking to you. We have quite a bit of a show planned today. It's not a show in the sense of a complete vaudeville act, but it is a show of some thought. That is to say that some thought has been put into it. On the other hand, of course, we're kind of doing it from the edge of our seats. So much is going on at the moment that it will be a bit of a variety show, we'll say, and topically. So I'm waiting actually for my co-host, Paul Cradle. He should be here in just a few moments. Hopefully, we'll have him join us. In the meantime, I thought I would just update you a little bit about my current progress. So, of course, I'm a writer on the side. Apart from Pandooradom, I actually have a life, but Pandooradom is also my life. Uh, and this other aspect of my life, but which is completely intertwined with Pandooradom and is very much a part of its greater spirit, uh, is writing. And it's not merely the act of writing, it's also the identity of being a writer. It's really the aesthetical experience of being a penner, a composer, a scribe. And it's wrapped up with an almost alchemical feeling at times. You're sitting there and a very romantic feeling overcomes you. I don't mean love romantic necessarily, but in the sense of romantic poets, the romantic era. You become overcome with these aesthetical fascinations. People like Wordsworth and Elizabeth Barrett Browning come to mind, and I suppose that's really what I mean. You get overcome by these feelings of aesthetic ambition. Something tickles you, and yet it drives you towards creation. It really comes out as a complete and utter need to create and to do art and to produce what feels to be, for really every single work you do, a masterpiece. Now, whether the world will judge it as such is unlikely, but it may be a masterpiece for you. And even if it isn't, it might be a masterpiece for somebody else, even for a random passerby, or should your work survive, after it's out of your direct care, it might be, might attain some kind of cult fame or cult infamy. Maybe infamy is not so bad as a second to fame. You know, it's a question. Would you rather be a known artist or poet, or that is to say, would you rather be would you rather be an unknown poet but who kept their pride and was not considered lame or a poetaster, rather than nothing? I guess that's really the question. If you can't be a respected, famous artist or poet or whatever it is, if you have any sort of uh, ambition to be known, what would you rather have if you can't attain that? To be completely unknown and save your pride, and yet what what is pride when you're completely unknown? It's it's a non thing. uh, so, or you can choose to be a poetaster, that someone who's widely considered to be a terrible poet or a terrible artist, You have that reputation, and yet you're known. And the thing is, in that way, you're through the door. You have one foot through the door, so that even if you're considered now a poetaster, it may be that in time you'll be considered a poet laureate. I mean, not very high chances of that, of course, but it is quite indelibly possible. Uh, and that's an important thing to recall, that maybe it is better than nothing to be considered a poetaster if you can't attain the highest ambition of being a poet laureate or of being a great poet or artist or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be a poet or artist. It can be really anything that you desire to be the best at, or to be at least competitive at, we'll say. And I think that's really the highest that people should aim for. I think there's something a bit problematic with the idea of being the best at something in really any field, because ultimately, as individual as we are, all of these fields mean very little without the greater collective experience of it. I mean, there's not even in science. I mean, you can't just have a single great genius scientist and then that's the end of that. You have to have the whole gamut of the scientists who have, in big and small ways, contributed to the greater field. And so it is with poetry and art and anything else. And so, in my point of view, I'm not a collectivist in the sense of China, and I lived there for many years. So, and I'm something of an individualist, but I also recognize that you can't think necessarily. Well, you can, but I don't know if it's really something that you would want to really do. That if it's, is it really advisable to want to be the best at something? It's a very, I have to say, as a born American, I have to say that it's a very American way of thinking. Uh, and I don't even know necessarily if the thought directly correlates with the thing itself. When you say to be the best at something, I'm sure that some people really mean literally to be the best at the thing they're talking about, but it sometimes is also just used in a general colloquial way to become masterful in some field in general. But as I said, I think that the real goal, the more truthful goal, is to become competitive within the field of people who are generally uh, good enough, we'll say. I think that's really it. Uh, I've mentioned Winnicott before on this channel. He was a psychologist of an earlier era. I don't know. You have various questions about these sort of sociological psychologist types of earlier times. Really, how scientific is it? But apart from those considerations, I did find reading him interesting. And specifically, I always recall this one line or this one concept of his, um, um, good enough mother. So it's not that, and it can also apply to other parents, but it was sort of generalized from that specific mention. So good enough mother, good enough father. And it means that you don't have to be the best mother, but you should be a good enough mother. Ima tovadaya. That's really the idea. And so that's really the element that we're sort of chasing after here, is an extension from that. You don't have to be the best poet ever, whatever that even means. There probably isn't such a thing. There isn't such a thing. I'm quite confident in saying that. Uh, but there is such a thing as being a good enough poet. And again, you can extrapolate this to really any field of expertise or amateur dilettantery, whatever it may be. So, but it really is about being good enough. And then from there, you kind of like specialize with various flourishes in that field or that discipline. So as long as you are proficient up to a certain level, that is what is required. That is what we're hoping for. So that's really the goal. That's really the main objective, I think, in order to become a great within your field. You don't have to be the greatest, but be one among the greats. And it's very spectral. That is to say, it's a spectrum. It's not either you are or you aren't. That's really important to know that there's nothing wrong, and it may in fact be preferable in being somebody who's a middling sort within the field, but you might even be the greatest in being that. You have people in the sciences. You have a few famous names. I don't even need to mention them, and you probably know who I'm talking about. But they're cult famous. The people know who they are, and they did contribute greatly, but in sort of using them as these totems of all science, you lose out on the contributions of so many other great minor scientists. But were their contributions any less? Some of these people were giants, and yet people barely know who they are. Same thing goes for poets, and again, really anybody in any discipline you can imagine. So this is what I'm talking about. I think that we can find a middling path without actually sacrificing our integrity as greats or potential greats. You can be a part of the greater pantheon. You don't have to be at the top of the pantheon, nor do you have to be below, at the bottom in the dregs. You can be somewhere within the greater spectrum. But the idea is if you're in the middle of this spectrum, you're actually not qualitatively any worse than the people at the top of the pantheon. It's actually largely arbitrary. People are placed there largely socially by it's by social considerations. Why is one poet considered to be better than another poet? Why is one artist considered to be better than another poet? It's prime artist. It's primarily a question of cultural values with in a given time. There may be one era where poet A is considered to be great and poet B is sort of they're okay. But then, a century or two passes and then it gets switched. Or it may be that the one that was on the bottom is now on top. And now the other one is barely a footnote in history. This happens quite a fair amount. If you look at some of the who were considered to be the great poet laureates of earlier eras, they may be people you've never heard of, even if you are sort of a poetry aficionado. So I think it's worth considering these things as a content creator, as a writer, as a poet, as an artist, as a scientist, as a mailman, as an inventor, as an auto mechanic, as a garbage man or woman, and so forth, a teacher, really anything that you want to be good at or that you want to feel is part of your greater identity, that you feel is your calling. And even if it's not, even if you kind of hate your job, and yet it gives some kind of meaning, even if it's a bit of a negative one, it's still a meaning. It's some meaning. Maybe it's better than no meaning. But my point is that you can sort of involve yourself in this alchemy to change these experiences into a transformative um, transmogrification, into a higher form of being. Not literally that you're turning into an angel or something, but that you are through a process of self-actualization entering onto a higher plane. And again, not necessarily cosmically, but just in your own mind. That is to say, once I saw life this way, and in the last few months, something just clicked and switched, and now I can see life in this way. It's really a change in perception. It's a way of unlocking your brain. And I don't mean, there's so many ridiculous infomercials and things I've seen recently, various systems of unlocking your brain. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking about the way that education in a university is capable of unlocking your brain, the way that having some kind of religious education might unlock your brain in certain ways, uh, but no less and but probably less than the way that exposure to the scientific method and science in general will unlock your brain. Specifically, and this is key, science imparts to the boorish among us that there is, like, one of the key principles of reality, insofar as there is such an objective thing, is that many facts, many processes are counterintuitive. This is so important, because I think the sort of folk wisdom usually tells us that what is generally intuitive is generally true. Couldn't be more wrong. Now, there are cases where we kind of get by. It's good enough, uh, you know, in terms of making your way through natural disasters. Folk wisdom will often survive you, or, it will allow you to survive. I mean, you know, it's pretty intuitive, I would presume. It's not just intuitive, it's also instinct. So you have instinct, intuition, and then the counterintuitive. So it's going to be largely instinctive. Grab the raft or the log. Don't drown in the flood. But then you see, somebody, you start getting hypothermia, or you have hypothermia, and you get to the point of what is it called? Uh, what am I? It's paradoxical undressing, or yeah, something like that. I may not be using the exact correct term in English. I have a lot of languages, so I do apologize if I've mixed up my terms. But something like that, paradoxical undressing, and this, of course, is where you are in the throes of hypothermia from the cold, and yet your body misinterprets it as heat, and so you feel like you're really hot, and so hence you paradoxically undress. You start actually undressing yourself to cool off, even though you're already very, very, very cold. So that's where the intuition, if you were capable of that at this point, would be, okay, I'm hot, I should undress. But the actual thing to do is to not undress. It's quite critical that you don't undress at this point, at this juncture, at this most serious and urgent of junctures. Do not undress, and that is counterintuitive. So this is what I'm talking about. Not the best example, but it gives you a certain sense of this sort of hierarchy I've given you here, that we have the instinctive, then we have the intuitive, and then we have the counterintuitive. Now, it doesn't mean that counterintuitive is always superior to intuitive. Not at all. Again, this is a spectral issue. It can be, sometimes intuitive actually works far better than counterintuitive, or counterintuitive may not even, counterintuitivity may not apply. But there are many, many cases, especially when scientific facts are concerned, where in essence, counterintuitivity trumps the intuitive solution. And in a way, we have to train our brains to be able to operate in this way. It may not be completely possible, because sometimes we only understand the counterintuity counterintuitivity of something because we've already gone through the empirical process. You may not know that the correct result or answer or proof is counterintuitive until the end of the experiment, the empirical process. I don't know if it's really possible to train your brain to be counterintuitive in that sense. And it may just be that we should be able to train our brain to be more empirical, to try to be a little bit more balanced in how we approach what we hope to be some kind of objective reality. So thank you so much for joining me today. I don't know where my co-host has gone. He seems to have disappeared down some other rabbit hole. Hope he's not defecting to some other channel. But we will check in and see what's going on with that in a moment. So this is Miles Gray, Pandooradom, checking out.